I finally have figured out where all these comments are coming from that are so adamant that I'm doing it wrong. Welcome to the Okie Woodsman channel. My name is Joe. I am a brand new STIHL 500i chainsaw owner. I have never purchased another new STIHL product. In fact, I've owned two STIHL chainsaws. I inaccurately stated that in my recent video. I've had an MS-180C and I've had an MS-460 pictured behind me. The MS-460 is absolutely known as a legend. Since I made my well-performing video about unboxing this new saw, I've put a few tanks through it doing two separate jobs. This video is going to be fairly controversial, but I'm going to do my best to explain my thought process. And I do want to preface this by saying that I absolutely love my STIHL 500i chainsaw, and you should always, I repeat, always follow all of the instructions in the user manual because there is absolute truth to be found in them, correct? This video is doing quite well. For 3 days, we're at 17,000 views, and I had a lot of comments about tips and tricks. A lot of people really like this 500i, but I want to focus in on something here that Mr. Rick at Living the Dream brought up, and I'm super thankful you did. So Rick is a self-admitted STIHL fan, and that's okay because they're great saws. And he said, read the instruction manual from starting procedures on. It's much different. And then this right here, especially the oil system. This piqued my curiosity because many people in the comments section mentioned that I'm going to need to make a slight modification. I'm going to call it a modification, not just an adjustment to the saw. And it is designed by STIHL. And for that reason, I don't know why, but they have an actual roll pin that you've got to punch down to maximize your oiling. Now, there's much more to this video than just that concept. And as I was reading through the instruction manual, I found a couple things that I found kind of humorous, some things that I found very interesting. It's always good to look through these documents, but I'm also finding that a lot of the comments that I've had in videos, because keep in mind, you know, Facebook got like 7 million views last month. TikTok is in the millions and YouTube is as well. So I get a lot of comments, and a lot of the procedural things, I'm realizing it's people that have probably read the user manual and said, this is the way dogmatically you must do things. We're going to talk about a few of those things, but again, I want to preface this by saying always follow everything in your user manual. It's best for your saw and best for your safety. This is absolutely a pleasure to run. I really enjoy it. I want to show you this right here. And we're going to talk about that in the user manual. I also want to take a moment and praise how complete STIHL is in making this user manual. That's going to be a double-edged sword in terms of the praise I'm giving it, because while there's a lot of information, there's also a criticism there. Now, I'm also going to bring up in that criticism not just STIHL. This is really probably across the board with every single product you purchase. I put a few tabs of some interesting topics that we're going to just briefly go over. It shouldn't take too long per topic, but I think you're going to find this interesting. And I do want to state that this is not only STIHL 500i specific. There might be a couple things that are 500i specific, but overall this is just about chainsaw operation and some of those things that constantly get repeated and just beat into people's heads online and towards me as a creator. One of the things I find very interesting is this right here in this section. It talks about using 89 octane. So many people insist on running extremely high octane fuels. According to the manual, it says 89 is the minimum on this saw. It also states 50-1. Oftentimes I'm buying premium, and it's because that is the easiest to find non-ethanol in. In the very same section, it also tells you that STIHL recommends STIHL HP Ultra. This is going to be fairly controversial because in this user manual, it should be stating things that are 100% factual and good practices. The problem is while HP Ultra may be sufficient for running a STIHL chainsaw, the lesser expensive orange bottle is totally sufficient as well. In fact, there are many people that would argue that the lesser expensive orange bottle readily available in the United States is a superior oil for the longevity of your chainsaw. I'll let you guys hash that out down in the comment section, but when you see stuff like that, that is, in my opinion, marketing rather than necessarily a good, valid recommendation. It causes me as a user and an enthusiast to question the validity of everything else they're writing in here. You see, if STIHL Ultra had the good FD ratings, such as other oils like Echo Red Armor, VP, the Husqvarna two-stroke mix or whatever, and if it could pass those same stringent guidelines for oil, I would have no problem with them recommending HP Ultra. But from my knowledge, the best that I'm aware, it is not considered the best oil out there. This was a very expensive saw. I'm interested in putting in something that's good for my saw, not something that is marketing. You understand what I'm saying? And I do want to say that there are plenty of people out there that have lots of time on their equipment that have had good luck with HP Ultra, but there are plenty of mechanics that also cite problems that they've seen. I personally haven't experienced HP Ultra specific problems because I only ran it for a little while back in the day because I thought it was the best, because it was the most expensive and it said synthetic. So I thought that's going to be good. I've always liked synthetic oils. Now, this is one of the things that Rick was mentioning right here. It's specifically, if you look at the oil adjustments, it's talking about part number 2. That is a roll pin that you can depress and have more oiling out of the saw. And as Rick stated in the comment section, he said that once you depress it, there's no going back. There's nothing in the book that tells you the negative of depressing it, but it also does warn you that once you push that roll pin in, you can't go back. And as far as I'm aware, this is a STIHL 500i only type scenario. But I don't know if you'll be able to see it in there, but it is right underneath, right beside, there we go, you might be able to see it there better. It's right to the left of that oiler adjustment. On my first run with this 32-inch light bar, which I absolutely love, I noticed that the saw did not seem to be sufficient oiling. It wasn't a situation where when I gave it throttle outside of a cut that it was wanting to sling oil, and it didn't seem to be saturating the chain real well. So I will be doing this procedure, but I always like to proceed with caution. Like, what's the negative, right? Why did STIHL not make that roll pin, or why is it engineered in there? For example, if I push that roll pin in all the way and turn the oiler all the way up, will the oil run out before the fuel? That's a question I have that I haven't seen an answer to. Maybe you guys can help with that down in the comment section. So to rephrase this is, why is the pin there in the first place? And if I depress it, would I ever wish I didn't depress it? Now, I will never be running a bar shorter than 24 inches on this saw. I hardly run 20 inches on anything other than 50cc saws and sometimes 60cc saws. So anything 60 and up really is going to be 24 and greater for my purposes and my style of cutting. And I did talk about the thoroughness of the STIHL manual, but this is one of those areas I wish they would have talked a little bit more about. Is it because maybe there's some sort of environmental regulation about flinging more oil out onto the wood in the field? Is it that, or is it because maybe when you depress it, it might run out of oil before you run out of fuel? Keep in mind, it is common practice, and the manual even tells you this, to refill the oil every time you refill the fuel. And oftentimes the fuel runs out at about the same time or slightly before oil is consumed. And please understand, this next topic isn't me just being nitpicky. This is, well, I'll just have to show you. Look how much writing is in here for how to put caps back on the STIHL saw. Please listen. I have plenty of fuel through STIHL chainsaws in years past. I have dumped fuel and or oil out of a saw because I didn't have the cap properly affixed in the saw, but I have to be honest and state that I probably have had more trouble because I just simply didn't put the cap on. You know, I refueled it on the ground, picked it up, and dumped fuel and or oil on my leg. So I think that this is more of an issue of them covering themselves, and unfortunately that's the world that we live in, is people expect because they didn't do something quite right, or they were in a hurry, or they didn't pay attention, that, you know, this is why you get a full page on how to put a fuel cap on. Now, I also have to say, why does the fuel cap require a full page of instructions on how to properly affix it? Not only that, it was something I noticed, and Husky's next on this. I'm going to show you an example of what I'm talking about. It must be such a concern of theirs that they actually have a warning sticker on the saw about how to make sure that your cap is on properly. They've been using this style for years. There's been lots of criticism of it. I've criticized it just simply because I don't think it's as user-friendly as something like this or like this, but it's a perfectly usable system. Now, when I flipped this saw up here just a moment ago, I did notice that my red armor has seeped out of here. This is not from me spilling. This saw's been sitting here probably about 3 or 4 days unused. This saw only has maybe 3 tanks through it, and so there was no dirt and debris around this cap. I'm not too worried about a little bit of seepage, but I know some people might be. I love this saw. In fact, I plan on running it today. I mentioned that I was not going to leave Husqvarna out of this, and I think that when you need excessive instructions for simple procedures, there might be a problem with your design. Let me show you a Husqvarna example next. This is my son's saw, and it's a fine running saw, but there is a major problem with it, and it has to do with the design and the amount of instruction needed. I want you to focus on this rear tag here. This is the starting instructions, which I don't have a problem with starting instructions, but it's this bottom line here that you might have never noticed before or didn't know existed on a saw. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. If you need to put an entire page in your user manual or plaster stickers all over a saw for something that should be as simple as pulling the pull start, I think that it might need to be revisited. This is ridiculous, and I liken it much to this right here. This is for proper operation. This is more for safety and liability. But they still are doing the same thing. They are giving further instruction because the product is designed in such a way that it's just not self-explanatory. Share below if you disagree or agree with me on that. Remember, there is no such thing as a perfect product. That's why I'm a big fan of all of them, because they all have their own strengths and weaknesses. Now, I mentioned a ton of people in the comment section stating things dogmatically about procedures. One of those things is the fuel oil mixture ratio. We've talked about that, so we're not going to talk about that again, but you will find that people in the comment section say, why do you know better than the manufacturer? Why are you running 40 to 1? And some guys even run 32 to 1. That's not good. That's not what the manufacturer recommends. We all have to recognize that there are multiple facets as to why these things are stated in the user manual. And it's not necessarily because it's the best thing for your equipment. Again, follow all of the guidelines in your user manual because that's the right thing to do. The next thing I found in the user manual that we're going to talk about today is chain sharpening. And chain sharpening is another extremely controversial subject if you dare show yourself doing it online. I do want to preface this and state that I am not a cutter of 30, 40, 50, 70 years like some people will say down in the comment section, but I think I have a good grasp on the mechanics and the understanding of how the cutter works. That doesn't make me a lead chain sharpening authority. However, I can officially say that there are plenty of extremely proficient professional cutters that have made a living on a saw that would disagree with what I'm going to show you next. In the user manual, it talks about all the chain stuff and all that. And right here, I want you to focus on this. It says all cutters must be of equal length and filed down to the length of the shortest cutter. Otherwise, the tendency and force of kickback and other reactive forces will increase. I finally have figured out where all these comments are coming from that are so adamant that I'm doing it wrong. If this is true, the only way to achieve this would be to mechanically grind chain with a depth stop where you're making every cutter identical. Lots of people say that you need to count your strokes. And actually, you know what? In fact, there's another thing in here that people always talk about. And actually right here, this is another one I forgot. There's two big ones in here. If you hit your chain with 10, 15, 20 strokes, people freak out because of this right here. It says file all the cutters at an identical angle, which that's absolutely true. 2 or 3 strokes of the file are usually sufficient for simple resharpening. And it also says remove a little material with each stroke. People freak out if you hit the chain 5 times or 10 times with a file. They say you're wasting it. All you need is 3. Well, this says remove a little material with each stroke. This is a section that probably needs more than a paragraph, but probably 3 pages, in all honesty. So, you know, while this is a very thorough manual, they address it, but this is not a be-all, end-all for chain sharpening here. 2 or 3 strokes does nothing for a chain if you hit the dirt. And I think that if you're reading the user manual, learning about a chainsaw, you're probably hitting the dirt, not dulling it because you just cut 2 cords of oak. Do you agree with that? So this is a big area where people propagate and they dogmatically state in the comment section saying that you're doing it wrong because you hit the tooth with 4 or 5 or 10 or 20 strokes. If I need to, I will hit each tooth 20 times. Now, keep in mind, I'm not trying to hog material out because I'm focusing on angles. And so that is my filing style. And I'm not saying that I'm perfectly proficient and the best filer out there. But the next thing, again, I want to talk about this is the cutters must be of equal length. And it's talking about a safety aspect there. So that's a liability thing, but it also has to do with the type of tool that STIHL makes to set rakers. And I want to explain that right here. And please, if I'm wrong about anything, please let me know down in the comment section. I am willing to humbly understand where I'm not right and where you have more information than I do. Now we need to have a top plate discussion here, and I mentioned it might have something to do with the tools that STIHL has available to set rakers. I'm not going to deny that having every top plate be completely equal, it must be the best case scenario on a chain. But if you have a single cutter on the chain that is more smashed than the rest, I am pretty positive that you do not have to take every other tooth to that. You don't have to take them all back to the same top plate size, okay? You don't have to match every tooth to that 1 or 2 bad cutters. You can file those independently, and I'm not an authority on this, but again, there's plenty of proficient people that make a living and their saws cut beautifully that will show you this exact same thing. And I think it has everything to do with what type of file guide you're using for setting your rakers. So you'll notice here on this chain, and I do want to state that this is hand filed, and I have used this. I did hit this one with a file here recently, but you'll notice this cutter here is much shorter than this cutter. And I can tell you that bystanders that were watching me do this work said, man, your saw is cutting beautifully. And when you see the footage of this saw cutting, I think you're going to agree. It was cutting absolutely beautifully. No chatter, no curved cuts. A lot of people will say that you're going to cut curved because the left side cutters are smaller than the right side cutters. Again, as I stated, best case scenario would be to have all the top plates be equal, and that can be achieved if you're going to grind a chain from day one and hardly ever touch it with a file. That's just the way I see it. The tool that STIHL recommends for setting the Rakers looks like this. What that's doing is that is straddling the top plate of a few, maybe 3 or 4 of the teeth, and setting this raker based off the average height of all these cutters here. If that's what you're using to set the Rakers, I could see why it would be important to have all the top plates of equal size. So what that is effectively just like this Oregon one, but half of it. So they essentially have a longer plane to catch that average here, and then it's open on this end, and you set your depth off of this right here. Now, if you're using a progressive raker gauge like this one here, it only factors in the tooth for that raker. It doesn't care what's happening here or here, because you're measuring off of just simply where this sits on that tooth and where the front sits on that tie strap. Do you see the difference? So while STIHL says that you should keep all your top plates the same, that's absolutely probably, again, the best case scenario. But if you're using a raker gauge that measures off of each individual tooth, you can have very good luck, just like I do, filing each tooth independently, not worrying about counting strokes and keeping all the teeth the same. And so I want to reiterate, it's a good practice to be reading that user manual and following all of the guidelines, instructions in there, especially on how to start a saw. You know, setting it on the ground, putting your foot in it, pulling and all that. Even when your back may have an injury. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense, right? To follow all of the guidelines. So the point of this entire video is this. The user manual has a lot of great information in it, but often so many people skip over the nuggets of information that are in there because there's so much other clutter. I have a tendency to ignore the whole entire manual quite regularly because it's got a whole bunch of extra information that I don't really need, or there's things in there like what I just showed you. It's like, this is ridiculous. Why is this in here? This is just simply not true, or this is not relevant to my scenario. And because of that, you miss actual good nuggets of information about the saw, like that roll pin. Now, many people made comments down in that comment section and let me know, but it's really nice to actually see it in the user manual, because my brain was like shocked, like, how can this be? Why is this like this? And the user manual doesn't address it, except for stating that it's a possibility to make that modification to the saw. So again, the point is there's lots of good information in there, but you have to be able to look at it. And if you have an understanding of what your equipment is doing and how the mechanics work. Now, if you're a brand new chainsaw user, stick to everything, and that's what the book's written for. But a brand new chainsaw user probably ought not be buying a 500i, but the manufacturer doesn't have a choice in who purchases their saws. So there can be people that are deeply not ready for a 500i or a 661, so they have to write the user manual for the lowest common denominator, and I do understand that. But because of that, when I see things like run HP Ultra on your saw and there's plenty of seemingly good proof and documentation that it's not the best oil, simply put, it's not even FD rated. And I do want to say AMSOIL is also not FD rated, if I'm correct in my thinking as well. But at least AMSOIL has a good track record of lubricating extremely well in outdoor power equipment. I think that this was an interesting video, and I appreciate you, Rick, for mentioning that. I actually do need to look at that starting procedure a bit more. I've seen differing views down in that comment section between Iffy Kidman and Dave's Logging. They were talking about the starting procedure, the primer bulb. I think that the primer bulb does feel kind of strange on this saw, but I want to say Dave's Logging mentioned that his like starting without pressing the primer bulb at all. And I've seen videos online where guys get this saw brand new and pull it once and it starts up. That hasn't been my experience, but I have been pumping that primer bulb. Before you leave, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know you're here if you're new to the channel, and I appreciate all the regular viewers. Thank you for watching the Okie Woodsman channel, and we'll see you on the next one.